Welcome to our daily reflection for this Sunday, April 7th. And today is Divine Mercy Sunday, one of St. John Paul II's greatest or favorite feasts. In fact, he made this a great feast day, thinking of Sister Faustina, St. Faustina, who talked about the importance of divine mercy. And one of the things I'd recommend to you, if you don't know the story of St. John Paul II and Sister Faustina and divine mercy, there's a beautiful documentary on this on the Forum platform called The Second Greatest Story Ever Told by Father Michael Gately. It's phenomenal. If there's anything you do today, if you want to get into the spirit and understand divine mercy, watch at least one or two of those episodes. They're phenomenal. I always go back to them and find new inspiration. So I highly recommend you watch that on Formed. And it's a great thing to do with the family. It's very beautiful and moving, and so I highly recommend that. So much richness in the readings today on this Divine Mercy Sunday, and I'm anxious to get to the gospel, but let me stop first at the first reading from Acts 4, because it really gives us a window into, in a sense, the church at her best. The church filled with the Holy Spirit, and more importantly, because the Holy Spirit's always present to the church responding to the Holy Spirit, right? And that leads to a beautiful thing. And what we find is that the community of believers in their fellowship were of one heart and one mind. Oh, it's so beautiful. Why? Because they had the heart and mind of Jesus Christ that they shared. And no one claimed anything as his own or any of his possessions as his own. So you see this incredible selflessness. Now you might think, well, gosh, that was ideal, Tim. That was, right after Pentecost, the early church was like that, but the church we don't do that now, right? And that, sounds like communism. Communism is actually, an ideology, obviously with Marx, but it's, in a sense, a very pale imitation of what charity actually accomplishes, where charity and love share things not in self-interest, but selflessly for others. And that is the impulse of charity. Now, Marxism tried to do this under compulsion, without love and without faith. And it was proven that it was morally bankrupt, right? Marxism and that kind of socialism led to you saw the opposite, right? The elite class and the Marxists who had political control had everything and everybody else had nothing. So that didn't work because it was with absent of love. And that's what we hear about love is, to love God is to keep his commandments. Again, it's to do the will of God, not your own will. And so it's dying to your own will, your own selfishness, and then that leads to charity and community and the flowering of that community of one heart and one mind. Now, I would say this, for those who think that we don't do this now, remember every religious community is an embodiment of this. If you're a Franciscan, if you're a religious sister, if you're monks in a monastery, they are living this rule where they don't have personal possession, but it belongs to the community. And so the religious are a sign for us of how this radical charity is to be embodied of selflessness. And if you look at marriage, the number one conflict in marriage is over money. It's over possessions and how my money gets spent for what I want rather than the other. And so even if you look at children, every parent knows this. When you have a couple, once you have more than one child, they say, it's mine, and they fight. And you have to teach children how to share. You have to teach them to grow in virtue and charity. So, and speaking of this struggle of selfishness and self, Jesus talks about this in the gospel when he comes on Easter Sunday and breathes the Holy Spirit upon the disciples and says, whoever sins you forgive are forgiven. Jesus wants to deal with sin, which is ultimately selfishness, is at the root of all sin. And the Holy Spirit, which is the love of God, is the antidote to selfishness and sin. And then Jesus gives us this great forgiveness, this great gift that he gives to the apostles, that they, in their apostolic priestly service, can forgive sins. And so now Jesus is giving the gift of divine mercy, and he's allowing the church to be dispensers of his divine mercy through the sacrament of confession or reconciliation, which is extraordinary. It's an extraordinary gift. We take it for granted, but that didn't have to happen that way, and it's amazing. And of course, I love here at the end of the story, Thomas was the one probably brave enough to leave the room to go get news and maybe get food. And he comes back and he realizes all the disciples are excited. You missed Jesus. And you can imagine Thomas feeling left out and not being happy about that. So he says, I'm not going to believe, right? Out of kind of, he feels left out. So then on a week later, which is Divine Mercy Sunday now, after a week after Easter Sunday, the disciples are gathered again in the upper room, and Thomas is with them this time. Maybe Thomas says, I'm not leaving, right? And Jesus again comes to them and says, peace be with you, shalom. And then he tells Thomas to put his finger in his hands and his side. And so notice that Jesus is known by the scars. He has a glorified, resurrected body, but he still has the holes in his hands and in his side. And so forever, with his glorified, resurrected body, forever in eternity in heaven, Jesus will be known by his scars. The scars that are these marks that represent divine mercy, because by those wounds we have been healed. And by those wounds, the Father forgives us and has mercy on us. And so those disciples now are to go forth as witnesses to those wounds of divine mercy and to give us the divine mercy by us confessing our selfishness and sin and finding forgiveness through the sacrament of reconciliation and by the mercy of God. So let's reflect as Thomas does when he says, my Lord and my God, and let's reflect on the gift of divine mercy and how we don't deserve it, but God gives it to us, and how that should lead us to great gratitude. May the Lord bless and keep you.
This daily reflection is brought to you thanks to the generous support of the Mission Circle. Join the Mission Circle to help Catholics worldwide understand, live, and share their faith. Sign up at missioncircle.org today.